This is the Be One Change One podcast, where our mission is to help listeners define values, practice integrity, and inspire change.
Our vision is to mentor men and empower them to achieve more by taking responsibility for shaping their own lives.
He's CAS, an evolving man who has been shaped by adversity and continues to grow through his imperfections.
And he's Roscoe, an imperfect work in progress that tries to suck less every day.
Between us, we have over 40 years of Air Force fighter pilot experience with countless hours as trainers, instructors, and mentors.
Join us and learn to take responsibility for your own life as we dive into subjects from leadership to resilience to vulnerability.
Be the one who changes their course. Be decisive, driven, and purposeful. Set the example for others. Lead. We wish we'd had this show when we were younger men.
Be the one.
He's following a lot closer than I am
Yeah.
on it, but I'm interested to see where it goes because I threw out there into the universe that
Tell people what we're talking about, man. You can't just hit record and then be on your stream of logic.
Yeah, sorry, man. It's like the burden is on them to enter my stream of consciousness.
Yes.
Yeah.
The burden is on you, listeners.
This is hey, I'm co-owner of this podcast, damn it. I am the assistant aircraft commander here.
Yeah.
The question that I posed 32 seconds ago to CAS in the pregame was, do we have any follow-on thoughts now that we've had a few days of watching the Iran-Israel thing kind of play out? And one thing that I threw out into the universe last week was somehow I just have, my gut tells me that the U.S. is behind this, or at least has a vested interest. Is a majority stakeholder in this.
I think so. And I mean, like we talked about, sorry, were you done? I don't want to interrupt your train of thought.
That doesn't exist. Go ahead.
I don't think the Israelis, so that like that first night, there was like 200 aircraft. They hit multiple target sets, right? I don't know that they do that without, and I could be wrong, but I don't think that Israel has the type of assets to generate the targeting requirements that they probably needed. So
you mean like national assets?
Yeah, like national assets, like space-based assets to be able to actually generate the kind of quality targeting information that they needed to pull off the attack. And the only place that you could get that from would be us. So when it, like I said, when we were talking about it before, when it first came out and they were like, oh, the U.S. had, like the first reporting that I saw was that the U.S. had no idea that they were about to do that. And I was like, yeah, I highly doubt that because, unless it's a very specific attack, like it was like, let's say in Iraq where they hit, back in the 90s when they hit the Iraqi nuke site, one target, maybe multiple dimpies, but one target set. That first attack that they did was well planned. Now, I have no doubt that Mossad was capable of knowing exactly what buildings to hit in Tehran to take out the leadership folks that they hit, to take out the scientists that they hit, and those types of things. But the targeting stuff that they would probably need for Natanz and all the other military and nuclear places that they hit, maybe they're capable of that. I don't know. But I would be surprised.
Yeah. They probably at very least borrowed some of our capabilities.
Well, and again, this is where, by proxy, we're always going to be associated with whatever they do anyways, because F-35s, F-16s, F-15Es, like everything they fly, most of the munitions, I mean, the only thing that's not probably U.S. derived, like 90% of the stuff on that jets, bombs, everything else is U.S., right? I know the Israelis do their own modifications for...
Yeah, they kind of bought their own thing.
Onboard countermeasures and some things like that. But, most of the stuff that they have, they get from us.
Yeah. I've started to question a lot when we think, like, you and I are thinking and we're talking about things that you can look up on Google, like a couple of quick searches and you can find this information. You can find that, Israel bought a different version of the F-35 so that they could do their own upgrades.
Yep.
And we might not know exactly what those upgrades were. We probably have, Google and Wikipedia have some strong guesses to that. Yeah. But I've always, I've learned to, as you say, be curious. And one of the questions that I ask is, what are they not telling us? Like, you know, you live long enough in the world that we lived in, and you realize that there's some things that are behind the curtain that people just don't know. You know, people just, we don't advertise this. And maybe you catch a fleeting picture of, the newest Dark Star aircraft flying over Kansas somewhere, but we're just not ready to tell you about it
even
yet.
Beside all that stuff, dude, like I will tell you this, when I went to weapons school, one of the coolest things about going to weapons school, because they want you to be, an expert in your specific aircraft, but they also want you to be able to have kind of a better view of everything that the Air Force can bring to bear.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get read in on a lot of stuff as a patch when you go through the schoolhouse. And it was eye-opening. I'll just say that. I mean, I can't obviously talk about any of it, but like, and I used to think about myself because, I remember a few times as a patch where, the intel guy would give a brief about, the Su-30 MKK or whatever was next, right? And, you look at the young lieutenants and they're like eyes wide open. They're like, fuck, dude, how are we ever going to, plot this, that, and the other? And I'd just be like, okay. You get such a specific viewpoint from, you tend to think, especially when you're younger, like the capabilities of the Air Force are kind of tied to what you know about what you can do in your own fighter, right?
Yeah.
Which when you see the bigger picture and how all these things can play together, and by the way, how we've never let all these things play together, there hasn't been a conflict yet in the 20th or 21st century where the United States military has allowed all its parts and pieces to play at their maximum level. And when you realize what all those, there's a lot of parts and pieces out there, and if you take that up to 100 on all of it, you're gonna wreck some shit.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. And as you're sitting here talking, I'm just thinking about, well, what about people who aren't like military minded or give a shit about what's going on in the news? And I think there's a decent lesson to be learned here just for, how you carry your own life. And it's, man, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the only way that you do know is to admit that you don't know and somebody help you out or point you in the right direction, or, click on the weird link on YouTube and watch the video that you don't know anything about. I mean, I do that stuff all the time, man. Here's one that I did just yesterday or day before. I was curious about, man, why does everybody in the world fucking hate Israel? Like, what did they do to piss everybody off? I don't really know the history of this. I don't understand it. And so I went and I read, I probably read 6 or 7 articles on it and ended up finding this really neat, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 pages, this long write-up of kind of the history of how that all shook out, going all the way back to the Ottoman Empire and, that area and who had influence over it, and how the Jews and Arabs sort of, ended up splitting up, and the Jews are like, fuck it, this is ours, and, all that kind of stuff. And man, I just had no idea. And it sort of enlightened me, or at least gave me some perspective as I view some of the headlines that are coming out.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter to me. It doesn't matter which side of the argument you fall on. Understanding the issue, I think, is the bigger point, right?
Yeah.
And so many people just blindly cast their, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to be offended on somebody's behalf here. I'm going to be a victim on somebody's behalf. I'm going to put up my Israel flag or my Palestine flag on my Facebook profile because, well, somebody else is. But dude, like you don't have you don't have that underlying foundation of knowledge to be able to make an educated decision on which side of that fence you're on.
Yeah.
And I think that's unfair to have an opinion without being informed.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think these types of conversations are always difficult because I think most people always feel like they have to choose a side.
Yeah.
Right?
You got to pick a jersey, right?
Yeah, I really do. I think people view these things, especially when it comes to military conflict, very black and white, right? And you pick a jersey when, it's one of those things that we've talked about on the podcast before, like both things can be true at the same time, right?
Yep.
Like Israel has a right to defend itself, and what's happened in Gaza is a humanitarian crisis, right? Like, it's fucking bad.
Yep.
Like, both of those things can be true at the same time. You know, and you know as well as I do, haven't been in the military for as long as we were, like the level that you take things to, you know, trying to figure out what is the appropriate level of, you know, military execution for any given campaign is always something that's difficult to manage, you know, minus, you know, a full scale war or maybe the first couple nights of a war. But when it gets into the humanitarian side of things, it's hard to manage those things, right? And I think what a lot of people don't recognize too sometimes is it's not a specific instance. You know, there's, like you were talking about, there's history for the Jewish people and the Jewish nation for persecution, you know? So yeah, I think I try to remember that, you know, both of these things can be true at the same time, right? That Israel has the right to defend itself. It needs to do what it thinks it needs to do to a certain extent. You know, and all these things will be debated and doped out over time, and history will tell us, or will try to tell us, you know, who was right, who was wrong, and all this stuff. But, you know, I think it's hard to determine what is proportionate at times. You know, and I mean, I also think about too, you know, their attack on October 7th was like, from on scale, if you scale it to what we saw on September 11th, like it was like 2 or 3 times bigger than what we experienced on September, for, you know, size of population, all that stuff. How would we have responded? I mean, you can see how we responded to September 11th.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Nuke the world.
Anyways, I think those things are hard. Now, back to the Iran and Israel conflict, you know, you kind of alluded to the fact that you thought Israel might just be working, you know, as a proxy to a certain extent. And I don't think proxy is the right term. I mean, you could say proxy, I think, in the instance that, you know, all the stuff that they got from us. But I don't know if it was directive from us, but I'm pretty sure at this point, from the things that have been said by the administration and kind of what's come out after the fact, that they knew and they had no problem with letting Israel take the gloves off. And I think at this point that Trump or the people in the Trump administration thought that this would bring the Iranians to the table for negotiation, like it would stress that point to them. So we'll see.
Yeah, you can tell, or I can tell in the last few days, that it seems like the administration, to include POTUS, has taken a pretty firm stance.
Yep.
And I mean, and this is just the way my brain works, man, but I would probably take it a step further than you did and say, we wanted to do it, but we couldn't, right? Optics, geopolitics, etc. But Israel, they're right there. They're neighbors, and they have motive. Yeah. So I can't help but think there was a little bit of, you know, nudging going on there. And hey, don't worry, we got you back, but we need you guys to pull the trigger first. And once you do, then that opens the door for us to go in.
Yeah.
Because now we're just supporting our allies, right?
Yep, we are.
It's not like we're going first strike on a Middle Eastern country, because we've already kind of ran that play, and you know, it worked and it didn't work.
Yeah.
But this is maybe another way to get to the same, you know, result. I personally view kind of the Ukraine money pit is sort of drying up a little bit. People are kind of catching on. It's been several years now, and people are like, okay, enough is enough. We need something else, right? Rich people got to get rich, and they're not going to get rich if there's no war going on. This is Roscoe's tinfoil hat going on. You know, the Halliburtons and KBRs of the world, they got to make HESCO barriers, and, you know, Dynacor's got to serve the food to somebody, so we need a conflict.
Yeah.
You know,
maybe.
Well, like you said, time will tell, though. I want to go back to what you were talking about, though, where you were talking about, you know, picking a jersey and two things can be true and all that kind of stuff. And I would submit, too, that there's in so many of these, like, worldwide issues, especially, and even domestic issues that we talk about a lot, there's so much nuance in there that it's hard to just throw a blanket over it, you know? And I mean, you can take any, I don't know, pull out your pull out your scorecard from the election last year and look at what the top 5 things were that voters were concerned about. And you could take any one of those, and man, we could spend days just talking about the nuance in each one of those, whether it's from women's rights and Planned Parenthood to immigration to the economy or whatever. I mean, there's so many little things. And I think that social media has probably steered us down this road of making quick decisions and moving on when that's really not the case. Yeah. And I know you like to say, like the American system, the constitutional system is designed to work slow. It's like turning a battleship
intentionally.
Right?
Yep.
And you can't just walk in and go, guys, here's the answer, and walk away.
Yeah.
Most times there's got to be a little push and pull, and there's got to be a little debate, and there's got to be like, what's the most pressing order, and things that we used to do in a briefing room, like triage it. What's the closest alligator to the boat? Let's kill that guy. So the nuance, I think, is where you can really start to sort of make your money, man. Is educate yourself, get smart on whatever the issue is that you feel passionate about or feel deeply about. Well, read up on it, get smart on it, and not from a lens of, I want this information so that I can beat CAS in the next debate.
Right.
I don't think that's the point. I think, the more you understand about it, maybe it helps educate your decision and your opinion about it.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you're really getting at, right? I think that this is something that we tend to lack in public discourse right now. And social media probably plays a part on that because you get fed the information you want to see, but it's critical thinking, right? Like, build some critical thinking skills. Yeah. Like, figure out how to be a critical thinker. I mean, that's one thing that I think college is good for in the younger generation is, even in a bachelor's program, at least in my experience, with a bachelor's in political science, like I was forced in classes to have to understand different political theories, even political theories like maybe that I didn't agree with, like Marxism or socialism or things like that, right? And understand the nuances of them, and the arguments for it and the arguments against it, and we've said this before on the podcast as well. Like, one of the best things you can do is, if you really want to understand something, is learn how to argue it from the other side.
Yeah.
Like, dig into it and see what are they really getting? Like, what are the points that they make, and are they valid? Like, is there, and then two, I think, man, there's just so much, like, we don't even base shit on scientific research or fact anymore sometimes, right? We just go wild dingo. And it's like, dudes, facts are facts,
Yeah.
If there's some scientific, now you have to be careful with that, right? Because anytime you look at from an academic perspective, climate change is a perfect example, right? Is the climate changing? I think most of us can agree it is. Are humans in, the Industrial Revolution that's gone on in the last century part of that problem? I don't think that's too much of a stretch to make, right? But is the world going to end tomorrow? Like, even when I read some of these, climate research, there's so many variables that you have to take account of, and if you pick and choose the variables you want, you're going to get a specific data set, right?
Yeah.
And so you can make it look really bleak. You can also pick and choose variables that make it not look so bleak, right? Which is where we get into the tit for tat of, oh, well, these guys say this, and so you have to pay attention to that stuff, right? Like, can you really account for all the variables?
Well, that's, go back to the episode we did on fallacies.
Because modeling is difficult. What's that?
The episode that we did on fallacies, you just gave an example of cherry picking.
Yeah.
You're only selecting the facts or the items that support your argument.
Yeah. And so, it's interesting because this book that I've been reading, I think part of the problem too is that, like, you put on your tinfoil hat and you like conspiracy theories. Well, part of that is, I think, because, largely since the 80s, I think you could make an argument that the technocrats have kind of taken over the government, right? And that's
explain
not necessarily
technocrats.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. Well, so technocrats are just people who value expertise, right? So they become experts in a specific field, and they're really good at that. But the problem is that they are experts in their field only, and they don't see the whole from the process that they're associated with. And I think from some of the research that I've been reading recently, you can make an argument that technocrats have largely taken over the government. We would call them, people call them bureaucrats. This is kind of the war that Trump's raging to a certain extent.
Yeah.
I think you can debate how effectively he's doing it, but we're bureaucrat because that's the problem is, right? So laws have become so complex that I don't even think half the people in fucking Congress know what they're passing half the time and what the second and third order effects of those are. And so when you turn that over to a institution like the Department of Education or DHS or you name it, right? The bureaucrats there have to go through that and figure out, okay, how do I take this and turn it into policy, right? How do I make this policy, right? And they're specialized and they have expertise in those things and they're really good. But I think part of the problem that we have now is that it's become so complex that unless you're like Walmart or Apple or a billionaire who can hire a bunch of fucking lawyers or a bunch of lobbyists, who can really understand it, drill down on it, and be nuanced in all the pieces of it. It doesn't make sense to half of us. And there's no ability for us as citizens to go and kind of go, this doesn't make sense. How do I make this work? And it's just, we'll fill out this form, right? And it's like, well, fuck, I don't even know. It's become so, and part of that is, the technocrats, they want to be very specific in their role. But so a good example would be the TSA, right? There's no common sense. I see it every day at the airport, right? There isn't, right? Because it's standard government, right? What do? We go, okay, we're going to set a policy and it's going to apply to everybody. So even if the 90-year-old grandmother in a wheelchair gets randomed, we're going to pull her aside. Even though every TSA agent there is going, she's not a threat.
You'll take nothing in.
There's right, but there's no deviance from that because that's the rule. We follow the rules and it applies to everybody. And that's where I think we need to reinstall a little bit of common sense back in almost like a military structure, right? What did you and I do? We got the commander's intent and we developed a game plan.
Yeah.
And the intention of the game plan was to meet the commander's intent, but we had a lot of flexibility in how we did that. And it'd be nice if a TSA guy could go, she's 92 years old in a wheelchair with an oxygen tank. I don't think she's the one that's going to take the airplane over, and just let her through security.
You never know, man. Hey, with the advancements in modern science, I'm just saying.
Yeah, right.
Grandmas are they're a little more limber and athletic than they used to be. I mean, who's to say she couldn't make it halfway down the aisle and hurl a projectile at the door? I'm just saying.
Yeah, maybe
it could happen. People get struck by lightning, get superpowers every day. All right,
every day. That's right. But my point in that is that distrust in that, because the average American can't negotiate all the bullshit that exists, with different regulations and, getting services if you're somebody who needs Medicaid or Medicare and all that stuff. That's where I think the distrust comes from. And that really does, I think, lead and lend to the conspiracy issue that a lot of people buy into and believe.
What you're talking about is really not even conspiracy, man. It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the system has just gotten, to use a DC term, it's bloated. And you can't have this conversation without just recognizing that every few years we have a turnover of, the jerseys change out. You get more blue people than red, or you get more red people than blue, or whatever. And that happens every few years. You put it on a 8 or a 10-year cycle, whatever. And look all the way back through, the 1900s, and you can kind of see this pattern. It just flip-flops back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But what doesn't change? Those bureaucrats that you were talking about, these guys who can get into these organizations and just sit there for 20 or 30 years, and they just ride it out, man. Oh, you don't like Donald Trump? Wait 4 years, bro. We did the same damn thing when we were in the military, man. Halfway through our careers, Obama comes in. And I remember, like, the people that I was surrounded with, that was a big deal for us because we had been largely under, aside from the first couple of years under Bill Clinton, we had been under Bush for 8 years, and that's all we knew. And then all of a sudden we got this liberal that's going to come in who's talking about budget cuts and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but we did live through sequestration, have to bring our own fucking toilet paper to work for a while. But that was a little bit of a, for some of us, it was like, oh man, what the hell's going to happen to us now? What if they start cutting flight hours and cutting fuel and cutting airframes and stuff like that? Well, then, after 8 years, somebody else took over, and then they just build it right back up. So these people who get into these organizations, whatever, Organization X. I like to use the CIA as an example because it's so easy. Everybody knows who the CIA is, and they generally know what their mandate is. And you got people who have 30, 40-year careers just sitting there. They just sit there. Oh, this president wants the daily brief in a PowerPoint. Oh, this president wants it written out in Word form. Oh, this guy wants to look like a newspaper. They don't give a fuck, right? They're just riding the wave until the next guy comes in, and they're going to push their agendas however the guy wants it to receive it, so to speak. That's how they're going to push it. And so many organizations in American, what we'll call government, I guess, the swamp, the state, the blob. I've heard that term a lot lately, the blob. Those guys they just sit and wait, man. There's no incentive for them to fix some of these problems. We talked about not too long ago, we were talking about the homeless problem out in LA. Well, the guy who's in charge of solving that problem, he doesn't have an incentive to solve the problem. He's making $300K a year, and he's got a nice office in downtown LA. If he solves the problem, he doesn't have a job anymore, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I would like to think that people operate from a little more integrity than that, and I'm sure that there's people that don't. I'm sure that there's people that are there
very optimistic and borderline naive, man.
Own reasons. But dude, at the same time, you need bureaucrats because who else is going to run? Who else is going to run it all? Right? It's not going to be Congress. It's not. I mean, you need people like that in those positions to operate and to execute.
Have we not created that construct? Did we not create that construct along the way? Like, I don't think the founders saw it that way. When you just read the purity of the founding documents, I don't know that they saw it ending up like this.
Well, I don't think they could have envisioned at all what we've become. I mean, I don't think they ever thought that in 250 years we'd be the world superpower and basically an empire.
Yeah.
But and the growth that we would see and the economy that we would have. But part of the genius of what they did was create a document that has allowed us to maintain a certain amount of flexibility so that we could, at the different ebbs and flows of our country, whether it was, Lincoln with slavery or FDR after, going into World War II and the Great Depression, be able to find flexible ways to get out of it and then rise above it. So, and I think we can do it here again too, right? I don't think that the institutions that we've created really serve the purpose of serving the majority of people in this country anymore. And I think that that's part of what's coming to head as well on both sides. I mean, I think you can make those arguments both from a Republican standpoint and a Democratic standpoint, or a Democrat standpoint. And it'll be interesting to see how they change. I don't know if clinging to, policies that we've had for the last, 40 years or so are going to fix it. I don't think they will. I think it needs to be something different. I think we've got to start to move in a different direction. But time will tell, so we'll see. I saw some interesting stuff.
Good.
Go ahead.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you. You were on a roll.
Oh, well, this book that I've read recently is kind of just made me think about some things. And one of the things that he talks about in the book is, Reagan was kind of the transformation of the force cycle. And because the issue at that time was that there wasn't a lot of capital available to the market, right? And we needed capital for investment in order to continue to grow, because we had industrialized, but we were kind of at the peak of industrialization. And you can see that, right? Because, the auto industry was starting to fail. Like it had kind of run its course as far as innovation, right? There was a time in the 50s and 60s where cars were kind of your identity if you drove a Mustang or you did this, right? And by the 70s, 80s, it was just a car, right? Like it had been around for enough decades at that point that everybody had a car, everybody needed a car. And depending on your economic status, it didn't matter what it was, as long as it got you to and from work, right?
$100 car.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So you got the hoopty. And so, like the tax cuts that Reagan made to the wealthier class and the interest cuts that he made and things like that just really, really worked in that moment and for the next couple of decades, because it spurred capital investment. And that capital investment that happened in that time frame is what led to the microchip and the advances that we've seen with like Apple and Google and the whole tech triangle and now even into the start of AI. But at some point it stops working, right? It's at some point it works for that time, but it doesn't work for what we need to move forward. And I think that that's where we're kind of at. And so with the big beautiful bill type of stuff, I wonder if I read an article the other day that outside of Iraq and Afghanistan, tax cuts over the last 2 decades have led to $7 trillion in debt. They account for 37% of the deficit that we have right now. So I'm not sure how continuing to do that, like how much runway do you need? How much road do you need? If we continue down that path, and the estimates with like the bill that the House passed are, $2.5 trillion if the tax cuts go sunset at a certain time, up to $4 trillion if they remain in place. And I know that the current administration's idea is that they'll grow the economy and that will offset some of that. I'm not sure how that's going to happen. All the indicators right now for the market are the economy slowing. He did just sign, or he did just announce the deal with the EU, but I think it's hard to grow the economy when you're kind of going to war with tariffs against everybody. But we'll see. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't.
Yeah.
The bottom line is, dude, we're worth $32 trillion in debt. At some point, like somebody's going to have to be honest enough to just go, we can't continue to cut taxes and hope that growth is going to build our way out of this. At some point, you have to increase revenue. It's the only way you're going to pay for it. And any additional debt and if we're honest about it, especially for guys like you and I who have kids that are, just now becoming adults and entering the workforce, dude, that's like, to me, it's just a tax on them, because they're the ones that are going to have to be responsible for paying it down the road. They're the ones that are going to have to deal with the fallout of this fucking boomer generation spending shit tons of dollars to sequester a shit ton of wealth to a whole bunch of individuals and then ride off into the sunset because they don't fucking have to pay the bill. Pisses me off. Sorry. I'm off my soapbox.
Are you sure? You done?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
I wanted you to get all that, exercise that demon, man.
Yeah, that's right.
Get it out. Shit. I don't know, whatever. Now, what you were saying there towards the end, I forgot what you were talking about in the beginning. I'd have to go replay that I didn't take notes.
That's okay.
You were talking about, you're talking about tax cuts and the debt and all that kind of stuff. And I think this is a really good example of there's more than one factor, right? Tax cuts, that's great for people like you and me who pay taxes. Who wants to pay more taxes? Everybody raise your hand, right? No, nobody fucking. And so that gains you a little bit of public sentiment and potentially votes.
Oh yeah, for sure.
If you're that guy.
Yeah.
But on the other side, when you kind of step back and look at it big picture, and one of the things you said was, all these tax cuts and our debt has just kept going up, or magnified or exponential or whatever. Well, it's because we didn't trim anything off of the budget and the bottom lines, right? The air quotes around government requirements and the money that we're going to shell out didn't go down with those tax cuts. So less revenue and more spending equals debt. I mean, I'm a moron and I understand that, right? And I never even took an economics class. So yeah, cutting taxes looks good on the surface, as long as you cut spending as well.
Yeah. No, there has to be balance.
Great, right?
I agree.
This goes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago about the nuance of these things, right? And then you're going to have people that are going to come in here, and they're going to counter argument to what you just said and go, oh, well, trickle down economics. Reagan and Bush's trickle down economics didn't work, and blah, 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 blah. And you just gave a really good example of how it did. In a lot of cases, it worked, at least for a little while.
Yeah, maybe that in the moment.
Maybe that had a sunset to it, but it kind of worked. Cut taxes. We invested, and people started making a little bit more income. People were able to spend that income, and now you start to grow the economy slowly.
So the part of the problem with that, and again, it's nuanced, right? Like you were saying, is in the 80s when capital came back to the markets, there was a lot to invest in, right? There was a lot of risk to take. When you start to look at all the .coms, I mean, you can think of some of them that didn't work out so well too, right? Like the AOLs, the Yahoos, But there was a lot of potential with the advancement of the microchip that let a lot of capital flow into the economy, and that's always a good thing, right? I think you could make an argument now that there aren't as many places for that capital to go. Like, it's kind of isolated, especially when you start to talk about, if you want to just focus on AI, there's only 2 or 3, maybe 4 big hitters when it comes to, AI and AI generation. Now there's, subsidiaries. You got to talk about, power and servers and all of that stuff. So don't get me wrong when I say that, but there's a lot more capital now than there is kind of places for it to go. And when really wealthy people have a lot of capital, they don't want to just hold on to it. So they put it into other things, right? Like real estate or whatever. Like, dude, you and I live in Arizona. How many people do you see come in and buy these properties, and they're from California, and they're just investment properties?
Yeah.
That's just people moving capital because they go, well, the Phoenix market's booming. I can buy this house for $650. I can 4 years from now sell it for $850 or $1 million. I'll make a couple $100,000 off of it, And so, but part of the problem in that is when that capital investment shifts from kind of more high risk, potential high yield investments, in the market to let's buy up a bunch of real estate. Well, what happens to real estate prices? They go through the roof. And then how does housing become more affordable for that middle and lower income family? It becomes harder, right? Rents go up. So there's all these second and third order effects that happen. And there's, anyways, I make that point not to drive like a, Republican or Democratic talking point as much as just to show like the nuance that can exist in these discussions, right?
Well,
and all the different factors that go into play.
Let's not skip an opportunity to go tinfoil hat real quick. In that same example that you just painted, companies like BlackRock are coming in. They're buying up all the real estate around. They're driving the real estate prices out of middle class range in a lot of areas. Like Phoenix is a good example of that. Like, a median house out here is something like $400K.
Yeah,
350 to 400.
That's
crazy, a lot of
right?
Fucking
10
money.
Years
right?
ago, dude, it was like 180, maybe.
Well, yeah, and I mean that was also kind of that was just coming out of the 2008-9 dip too.
The
so I mean, maybe
crisis.
A false comparison, but whatever. The point is made. But one of the byproducts of that is if the middle class can't buy housing, what do they have to do? They have to rent, or they have to rely on subsidy. What does that equal if you're a government? And this is tinfoil hat. That equals control. And you can kind of see how it may be in the government's best interest to kind of maintain this or maybe even promote it a little bit, because now if I can make someone dependent on the government, and then all I have to do is tell them every 4 years that I'm going to help you out, I'm going to keep doing this, I'm going to give you more, I'm going to give you these monthly stipends or whatever subsidy it is that I'm going to grant you because you're impoverished, or, you know, dare I say middle class who can't afford a house, or whatever it is, right? Well, then now I got your vote, and now I get back in office for another 4 years. See, and this is the self-licking ice cream cone of politics, right? Is I'm going to tell you what you need to hear so that I can get your vote. Am I going to fix it? Fuck no, because it's not in my best interest to fix it, right? I'm going to do
and they may not even have the power influence.
I'm going to do what I need to do to maintain my existence and keep getting paid.
Yeah.
And I mean, look no further than the African American community in some of our major cities. They've been sold a bill of goods for a really long time, and not a lot's changed.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how the dynamic changes. I don't think that what we've done for the last 3 or 4 decades is going to help us move forward at this point.
I don't disagree with that.
I think it's got to be something different. I mean, and like, dude, a perfect example is the estate tax. So if there's even, this is just you and me talking now because nobody's even listening anymore at this point. So I want to say that the estate tax was capped at, it was either 18 or maybe 22 million, I think, previously or currently, which basically just means if you're very wealthy, you can give 18, whatever. Let's just say it was 22 million. I think it was, I can't remember what the number was, what I read, but let's just say, for shits and giggles, let's just say 20. If you're really wealthy, you can give $20 million to your kid or your kids each, and that money cannot be taxed.
Individual is 14 million. Married couples is 28 million.
28. So, and I believe the bill that the House passed, that estate tax goes to 30. You could drop it to so if your mom and dad are rich and they give you $10 million, you're pretty much set for life. Like, you could just take that money, invest it in ETFs, and you probably could live off the dividends.
Yep.
A very comfortable lifestyle for the rest of your life, and you wouldn't have to do a thing if you have absolutely no desire to do anything with your life, but, you know, have a really nice place in LA, party on the weekends, party over whatever, right? Like, you could easily do well for yourself. You could drop the estate tax to 10. You could take all of that taxed income, and that taxed income could go towards all kinds of different things, right? Like, you could completely fund from a congressional standpoint, like free lunches for kids at school. You could fund childcare, you know, early development childcare for single mothers, you know, who maybe need that in order to hold a job so that they're not on welfare. Like, there's so many things that you could do with that money. We keep going the opposite direction. I don't think it's a hit to those people to take it back this direction a little bit, you know, in order to help lift back up that lower and middle class, because the reality is the middle class is shrinking. And, you know, a lot of people can argue about what the greatest invention of the 20th century was, but the greatest invention of the 20th century in America was the middle class. And that happened post World War II with, one, industrialization, but two, a whole bunch of things that gave people who wouldn't have had access otherwise access to move up that ladder, like the GI Bill, giving all those veterans an ability to go to college, get a degree, and move up that ladder economically. And we need to find ways, I think, to do that again, because until we do, I think it's just, I don't think it's going to work anymore.
A few episodes ago, a couple months ago, we were talking, and I think I made the comment about how I'm looking forward to sort of this changing of the guard in our American government. I'm really looking forward to these 80-somethings and 70-somethings.
Oh God, they gotta go. We need to
retire
age limit
on a front porch somewhere and be a grandma, right?
It.
And just enjoy sipping your smoothie and reading a book. Okay. And I'm really looking forward to some of these 40 somethings and 50 somethings that are coming in, right?
Yeah.
And every year we kind of see this freshman crop, and we've seen a few military guys get in there, with strong military careers through Iraq and Afghanistan come in, and they definitely have an interesting point of view on maybe how some things should run, because they worked for the government for a really long time, and maybe career fields that inform their opinion in one way or another. We've got our vice president is a really good example. I mean, he's a young guy, right? And he's paired up with a pretty old dude, right?
Yeah, he is.
A self-made, kind of a business guy or whatever, but JD Vance, I mean, I'm really looking forward to what he does in the next few years, next decade or so, because, and I'm not advocating necessarily for a second or a third Trump tour or a JD Vance back to back like Reagan and Bush did or anything like that. I'm just saying, I think we need some of these. We need some fresh meat, man. We need some of these younger guys to come in with some different ideas.
Yeah.
Some of because I mean, look at a lot of your guys who are in your house right now. They were 80s and 90s type people, and to your point, that's the world that they live in.
Boomers in there right now,
and
man.
they've seen this play going over and over and over again. And I can't help but think, man, that they're at a point where they just don't give a fuck anymore,
dude,
about solving the problem. They just looking out for their own interest until the day they die, and then it'll be somebody else's problem to solve.
Well, they're fucking senile half the time. I mean, so like, if we can't get term limits,
shit in his pants.
Yeah, like we need like when senators are high fiving themselves in their wheelchairs through the halls of Congress, like we've gone too far. When people are stroking out on camera, okay, it's time.
We just had a dead guy president for 4 years. I mean,
well, that's a great example, the fact that shit and like, if we're not going to set term limits, then set age limits. And I know that sounds
Agreed.
like super ageist and all that stuff, but guess what? Like I like Scott Galloway, and he goes, so's biology.
Yeah.
Like if you can't be president until you're 35, I don't think you should be president after you're like 75, right? Because let's be honest,
75 is a high end, bro.
Most people acknowledge the fact that you cognitively start to slow down in your 60s and 70s, and it's a very demanding job. And I think it should be the same for the senators and the congressmen too, like these people that just fucking hold on forever. The Dianne Feinstein, and it's on both sides, right? The Mitch McConnell's, the Dianne Feinsteins. She wasn't even present for like the last 2 years of her term, because her health was bad, and she was 90
dead.
fucking years old and dying. So it's like, just let it go, you guys.
Well, what's funny though is there's a lot of irony mixed up in that, is because those are the same people that are going to sit up there on their high horse, and they're going to preach to you about things like Medicare and Social Security. Well, A, motherfucker, you ain't taking neither one of them. And B, why don't you go retire and sit on a fucking porch and have to live off of that shit? Maybe then you'll have an incentive to actually fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, that'd be a fun episode to just go down that rabbit hole for a little while and just bitch about old people. But think about. So I'm getting ready to take my 50th lap. And
welcome.
Well, that puts my parents at a certain age.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to out my parents, but I'm just saying that they're at a certain age, right? And when I sit down and have dinner with my mom and dad, there's no fucking way I would want either one of them signing off on a bill to run my country.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. Like, there's most people that I know that are my age, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this. Most people that I know that are my age won't let their parents babysit their kids or grandkids.
Yeah.
Why? Because they're fucking old, man. I mean, if little Johnny runs out the front door and starts running to the street, grandma ain't going to chase him down, Yeah. Anyways, sorry.
Yeah, we need age limits.
I think, that'd be a good start. Age limits, term limits. I think we've definitely talked about that for sure. Back to the Iran and Israel thing. I'm interested to see how it plays out. Oh, by the way, this has been very good fodder for my creative brain.
Oh, I bet.
I'll tell you about that when we get offline.
Especially conspiracy theory stuff, right?
I have crafted an interesting narrative, based on pretty current events. And you take a little bit of, and it doesn't take much. you just take just a little tiny bit of creative license in a couple of these areas, and all of a sudden you're at World War III.
I have a question for you. Has there been any actual intelligence that they've shot down an F-35?
I have not heard of any.
Yeah, I've seen articles where they've claimed that they've shot down like 2 or 3 and that they have they've captured a couple of pilots, but I haven't seen anything credible. I was just curious.
I don't know. If you had heard anything. My father-in-law was texting me the other day asking if I'd heard anything, and I haven't, man. And I mean, to be fair, I haven't sat down with anybody for any length of time and talked about it. In that area or in that world, but I would think that by now, if something would have happened, we'd have known about it or we'd heard about it.
Well, it was funny because Iran released this picture of an F-35 crash and a bunch of people around
I saw that.
But the people were bigger than the buildings.
It looks like
and the
ants
cars
crawling
around
on
there.
Yeah.
It's
a giant F-35.
It was so poorly photoshopped. It was so bad.
Yeah, well, that's their best guess at propaganda, right?
Yeah, Jesus.
Somebody who wasn't trained on Photoshop.
Yeah, you still suck.
Time to fire your PR guy.
Yeah, no doubt.
Now, I haven't heard anything, man. I haven't heard any cool stories at all, really. A friend of mine who is over there on the ground, and he is in Israel somewhere, and I don't know where. Some of his buddies took some shrapnel and got some concussions from an impact the other day, from some missiles or something. From Iran. But other than that, man, I haven't really heard anything. I know it's kind of going both ways now. That's at least from what I can tell.
Well, I think it's still relatively contained. Israel, I don't think is doing all that they could if they wanted to. I read an article the other day that they basically established their supremacy over Iran. So I mean, they could
I saw
go to
a lot of T-Flare video from F-14s blowing up on the ramp and
they could,
shit like that.
And if that's the case, they could go to fucking town right now if they wanted to. And so I think there's some restraint being shown, and they're doing the standard tit for tat, shoot missiles at each other from, but we'll see.
Yeah. Is it restraint or is there an agenda?
I don't know.
Because those two things may not be,
time will tell.
They may not be separate. They could be together. There could be a specific agenda, and they're very deliberate in their actions. This isn't, you're not seeing the same moves that we pulled in Gulf One, where, dude, we're just going to turn your country to a sheet of glass and then you deal with it.
No, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you could, to not escalate things further. I think that there might be some restraint. That might also be part of the agenda or part of the game plan. Or it may be a tactical pause to let parts and pieces fall and get a little more intel and then figure out what next steps need to be.
Maybe they didn't plan on it going this well.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. That's interesting, man. I think another course of action might be, or at least if I were Israel, I might be thinking about it like, dude, now's our chance to establish dominance. In 1967, we took over the Sinai, Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. Why not go take over Iran now that we have, we've clearly established that we have the upper hand,
What do you mean by take over Iran?
Well, this is the whole reason that Israel's kind of on the shit list to begin with, is the Jewish population in Israel sort of took over and forced a lot of the Arabs out. And that was in 48. And then in 67, they heard a rumor that Egypt and I think it was Syria were about to make a move on them. And so they just preemptively went and fucked them up. And Egypt was like, oh, well, no, we're good, dude. You got it. And so they gave them the Sinai and Gaza, and then Syria's like, okay, yeah, we're good, dude. And so they got the West Bank, and that's where kind of that division between Palestine and Israel all sort of started. There was the 6-Day War in 67. Yeah. But if this is another one of those nuanced things that I I think I've been thinking about this a lot in the last couple of days since I really read up on this, and guys, that's all just surface level knowledge. I haven't really read deep into this. There's a couple of books that I have kind of in my TBR list right now that I want to go down and really get smart on this, because it's a cyclic thing. Since 48, when Israel declared independence, it's sort of a cyclic thing. Like every 10 or 15 years, it kind of comes back up, right? And go as recently as, what was it, 93, the Oslo Accords, and then in 99, Bill Clinton did some shit, and then now there's the Abraham Accords, and so I think I keep thinking about this over and over and over again. I'm like, Israel sort of made their claim by taking over land, right? And that's not untrue of any country ever that's existed, or any empire ever. The United States, we took our property from the British Empire. The British Empire fought with, they've had to fight and negotiate from everybody from the Roman Empire to the Vikings to the French to us to everybody. And finally, way back when, somebody finally drew some lines on a map, and we all kind of agreed to it. So hopefully eventually we'll get to that point over there in the Middle East. I don't know. But every country ever has their borders drawn, probably because of a skirmish or two.
Sure.
Or an outright war.
Yeah.
So if you've got a chance, if you've got a dominant hand over Iran, why not use the opportunity to expand that line on a map a little bit?
Yeah. Well, where Iran is related to Israel, right? Like, I don't.
Do you know where the United States was in relation to the UK?
Yeah.
Across a fucking ocean.
Sure. I don't know the demographics. I'd imagine that Iran has more people in it than Israel does, but I could be wrong.
Probably. Yeah.
You can't. I think it would be difficult to make that displacement happen, but I think it's more of a strategic thing, personally. But yeah, who knows?
Well, it makes for good podcast fodder, anyways. for a call that we didn't have any topic.
Yeah. But
here's filled an hour.
but underlying. But I guess here would be my question to you: if you think that the administration is using Israel as a proxy, and that we're pretty much involved and asked them to do this stuff, how does it serve the deeper agenda of extending the Abraham Accords and getting more Middle Eastern countries aligned with Israel? Like, how do you see them maneuvering in that space to make that an eventuality or something that could happen down the road?
Okay, well, let's pretend that you're
especially when Gabby, what's her name? DNI? The chick from Hawaii?
Tulsi Gabbard. Yeah.
Just said like 6 months ago that Iran was years away from achieving any kind of nuclear capability.
Yeah. Dick Cheney was 100% convinced that Iran had WMDs too.
Yeah, Iraq. But yeah.
So in the Iraq, such as the so let's pretend that you're, I don't know, I guess Saudi Arabia is probably not we'll just use Saudi.
No, Saudi's that's what they've been. I think that's been Trump's hope.
Let's use Saudi as an example, and
let's with Israel.
Just take them and set them off to the side for a second, and then let's make a phone call to Syria and to Jordan, and Yemen's probably.
Jordan's already part of it.
They're a lost cause. Yeah, but the fucked up thing though is they sort of let it atrophy after 2020. It didn't go away. It's not like it dissolved, but it just kind of fell off a little bit because the previous administration didn't really keep up on it. It's not like they went in there and just, they didn't just wipe it completely off by like executive order or some shit like that, but they definitely didn't nurture the baby, so to speak. So let's just put in some phone calls to some of those countries around there and go, hey man, did you guys see what just happened to Iran? Oh yeah, holy fuck. Yeah. Well, why don't we all get together and just talk about it a little bit? I don't think that's unreasonable. I don't think that's too far out of the realm of possibility. And if you can get 4 or 5 of the maybe smaller, less strategic companies to get on board with that, now you can make a phone call to Saudi Arabia and go, hey man, like everybody else wants to come to this meeting. Do you want to come? Like, let's just sit down and have a conversation.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it wouldn't lead to meetings. I think what you're doing is you're going to turn factions within each of those countries hardly against Israel, and it's going to make it almost politically incapable for the leadership in those countries to move down that road now.
Don't disagree. And, we've been on the receiving end of that too. Think about the second Iraq invasion in 2003, 2004. That did not go well for us. Like, easily 2/3 of the country was against us being there altogether, especially after we killed Saddam Hussein and tried to force our doctrine on them. They're like, no, fuck you. Like, we're our own people. Like, we're going to do our own thing. We thank you for getting this asshole out of here, but also fuck off, So yeah, no, I don't disagree with you on that one. There will be factions for sure, but are those factions going to be the ones who are the decision makers and the policy makers? That's another question.
Yeah, well, that's my point. Is I think that those factions, especially in Saudi, will keep the king from being able to move anywhere close to something in that direction.
Yeah, Saudi's the crown jewel.
It is the crown jewel
for a lot of reasons. Saudi's the crown jewel, and that's why I say you probably don't start with the phone call to the prince. You probably start with the phone call to, I don't know, Syria, or some of those surrounding countries over there who have a hand to play, but it's not as big of a hand.
Yeah, I think it's just it ties to the complexity of these issues. I think it's hard sometimes to make decisions that encompass the second and third order, and take the whole thing that you're trying to achieve into effect sometimes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the administration did a good job of that on this one.
Which administration?
The Trump administration, with if they were in direct support of Israel making this strike on Iran.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what the narrative is in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's early and time will tell, but I worry that it's going to really undermine their ability to move forward with some of the softer power stuff that we were talking about in the last episode, and getting some really good effects out of that, and normalizing some relationships and building some cooperative structures out there to try to minimize the amount of conflict that we see in that region in the future.
Yeah, and I'm really curious to see. I'm curious to see how the UN pops in and weighs in, and more of the international community, because
they've been pretty quiet so far.
Yeah, well, not everybody is a staunch Israel supporter out there. In fact, we're one of the few who are.
Yeah,
and so when the international community and the UN and people like that start to weigh in, it might change.
Yeah, could.
Yeah, so the next few weeks I think are going to be interesting.
Yeah,
and who knows, man? Maybe it's something as simple as Trump says, "Hey, go fuck them up real quick," and then I'm going to step in and air quotes negotiate a ceasefire for you guys. That makes me look really good. And I don't know, I'll give you a couple of 35s. It could be completely self-serving. Who knows?
Yeah, it could be.
That'd be a fun little narrative to play with, so to speak.
It could be.
But anyways, man, good banter as always.
Yep,
good stuff. To the listeners, parting shot: read, study, research. Form well-educated opinions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would just say too, on top of that, like, critical thinking is important, and so learn how to build some critical thinking skills.
Hell yeah.
Learn how to understand the other side of an argument, and I hope there's so much divisiveness and vitriol in the political conversations that take place now. And you and I are on the opposite side on a lot of different issues, and we're on the same side on some, but we disagree on some things. But dude, here's a perfect example. These last two episodes are perfect examples of a way that you can have a civil, educated exchange of ideas, exchange of information, and share your viewpoints with one another, and not at the end of it be going, "Fuck you, you voted for Trump," or "Fuck you, you bleeding liberal Democrat." Yeah. I mean, like, we can have these conversations, guys. Like, you just take the emotion out of it, get into the rational side of your brain, and have some conversations. You may learn something. It's so divisive right now. You can actually have these conversations and still like each other at the end of the day. So,
yeah, and I think that Katie gave me a warning.
Don't lead with "fuck you." That helps.
Katie gave me a warning a couple days ago about we're getting ready to go over to down by Irvine to her high school reunion, and I said something like, "Hey, everybody's going to be on like good behavior, right? With all these riots and Trump and all that stuff." And she looked at me and she goes, "I'm worried about you." I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, I can I can have a conversation. I can see both sides of this, and I can have a conversation.
I love you, Katie, so much.
But it highlights something though, and I think one of the reasons that, you know, with your close circle, you're able to have some of these discussions and not get offended is there's a level of trust there. And, you know, I think people understand, the people close to you understand that that's not the sole reason that you're basing your opinion of them. I do think less of you because of a lot of the things that you said today, but that's not the point.
Yeah, it's not the point.
Whereas, you know, if I go out there to this high school reunion, strike up a conversation with a complete stranger or somebody I've only met once or twice, that's a little bit different.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll keep my gloves on.
Well,
and probably just get up and walk away because it ain't good. In the end, it ain't worth it.
Good advice for the younger listeners, or maybe even the older ones at this point. A couple of things in social settings to avoid are politics and religion, right?
That's good. Yeah. And even more succinctly than that is never pass up an opportunity to shut the fuck up.
Yep.
Cool, man.
Very true. We learned that at an early age.
Be the change.
All right, be the one.
Thanks for flying with the Be One Change One podcast. If you got something out of this show, then be the one and share it in your circles of influence.
You can be our wingman through our website at www.be1change1.com. That's B and the number 1, change and the number 1.com.
We invite you to be the one and join our fighter squadron on social media at Be1Change1 on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can follow us at Paul Roscoe White on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as Roscoe's website, www.paulroscoewhite.com.
You can email us from the website and please leave comments, share, and ask questions, or leave ideas of things you would like to discuss on future podcasts. Most importantly, be the one that helps us win the algorithm by leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Thanks for joining. Until next time, be the one.